As we all know, the internet is an incredible place to find photos that can inspire, awe, spark curiosity, or simply stop us in our tracks. The problem is that, especially on social media, most of these images are posted with no context or understanding of their larger story. One of my pet peeves is seeing an amazing image that clearly tells an incredible story but having nothing to explain it. I'm guessing this may be an annoyance of yours as well. So today you're in luck. In this video, I'm going to show you some of the most widely shared images on the Gearhead internet and tell you about them. The who, what, when, where, and why of these moments. I'm going to give you enough of a dive into these images to give them meaning, but not so much as to put you to sleep, I promise. Machines, race cars, historical moments, and more. Ready? Here we go. Wait, this is a highly important note. All of these images, like my voice, are real. None of the stuff is AI generated. My voice is not AI generated, and the descriptions all come from research actually done by me, not some upchuck of words from an AI generator. Okay, now that we've cleared that part up, it's time to get on with it. We start here. Daytona, 1979. Lap 4 of the Permatex 300 in the NASCAR Late Model Sportsman Division. This is the car of Joe Frassen, who had contacted Freddie Smith and was skidding to a stop on the track. Sitting at rest, Frassen's car was piled into by driver Delma Coward at full speed ahead. The 20-plus gallons of fuel in the car went off like the Hindenburg. The heat from the fire was so incredibly intense that Frassen's goggles started to melt to his face as he was climbing out, and yes, he did walk away. Coward did as well. Another driver, Don Williams, tried to avoid the wreck and crashed. He spent 10 years in a semi-conscious state and passed away. Frassen had 19 top 10 finishes at NASCAR's highest level and was a very good short-track racer. He also nearly won the 1970 Rookie of the Year. Delma Cowart was a party animal who joked that his car wore his percentage chance of victory on the side. He raced as the number 0 for years. Don Williams had never raced on an asphalt track or on a track longer than a half a mile before this event. He paid $20 for a NASCAR license and was running 185 miles an hour virtually the next day. That was a slight uptick from the 80 or 90 he was making on dirt tracks. This incredible conflagration lasted a moment. The repercussions of it lasted a lifetime, with 3 men, all violently involved. Pardon me, folks, I love the hydrangeas. This is Roscoe Sarlis at the 1919 Santa Monica Road Race, Lap 3. Roscoe has completely overcooked a corner and is making a hasty entrance into somebody's front yard, nose first. The curb and the sandbags have kind of launched the car, and they've also wrecked the front end of his Duesenberg in the process of also taking him out of the race. 17 cars started in the 1919 race, and 8 finished. Millionaire playboy Cliff Durant won. Durant was the son of the founder of General Motors. The Santa Monica race had a 10-year history from 1909 to 1919 before fading gently into history. Roscoe Sarlis did not have that kind of same gentle end. On September 17, 1922, while racing at the Kansas City Speedway board track, Sarlis hit Pete DiPaolo, a champion and nephew of the legendary Ralph De Palma, and his car launched up the board track at some 110 miles an hour through the top railing and flew into the air, falling 50-plus feet and bursting into flames where it landed. Sarlis did not survive. He was 30 years old. A hard-nosed driver who was a perennial top 5 finisher in the AAA championship standings, his fate was one shared by many, many racers in the first decades of the 20th century. This is a legitimate nightmare scenario. This photo from May 13, 1949 shows the horror inside the Holland Tunnel in New York City after an incredible fire. A truck illegally carrying some 48,000 pounds of volatile carbon disulfide blew up a half mile from exiting in New Jersey. A second truck carrying chlorine immediately exploded as well. Soon nearly 30 cars and trucks were burning inside the tunnel. Estimates put the intensity of the fire at some 4,000 degrees at its peak. Cars and trucks were partially, and reported in some cases, completely melted and fused together. Incredibly, only 1 person died and 66 were injured. Most people ran from the tunnel's escape portals, and the tunnel's ventilation system was used in a full power to draw smoke out and feed fresh air in for firefighters. It reportedly worked so well at the time that firefighters did not have to wear their masks while they were battling the flames. The melting of baseball bat-thick electrical and telephone lines jacked up long-distance calling from New York City for an extended period of time. The craziest part of the whole story? Only 56 hours later, traffic was heading back through the tunnel after a mad thrash through the weekend to clear rubble from the collapsed ceilings and melted cars and trucks. Continuing repairs done overnight lasted until August of 1949, when the tunnel was back, good as new. Pocono, 1989. Lake Speed has exploded an engine entering turn 2, and as he slides along, the car he struck, driven by Greg Sachs, flies through the air. Pocono had weird metal walls at this point, and the initial hit was so hard, the car actually broke through it before going on this sickening flight through the air. After a number of flips and rolls, Sachs ended up on his roof, and then the car caught on fire. With oil and fuel running below him, Sachs braced himself with one hand in a river of boiling oil and released his belts, making a hasty escape. Lake speed was also okay. Funnily enough, this was the first race for Greg Sachs' new sponsor, Dinner Bell. The TV guys, Benny Parsons and Ned Jarrett, couldn't believe that both drivers actually walked away from this disaster. Greg Sachs actually gave a lighthearted and humorous interview after the wreck, joking that Dinner Bell really had gotten their money's worth out of the first race they sponsored the car. Sachs had a pretty long career in NASCAR, running at least one race every year between 1983 and 2006. He had one career win, and that in and of itself was probably one of the top 5 shockers in NASCAR history. He's headed for the drink. Australian race car driver Paul Hawkeye Hawkins does not exactly enter the conversation of Formula One greats very often, but he does share a unique accolade with one of the most famous and skilled racing drivers of all time. Both Hawkins and the legendary Alberto Ascari have launched race cars into the harbor during the Monaco Grand Prix. Ascari did it first, but Hawkins arguably did it best during the 1965 race. Both guys paddled their way ashore after living the accidental life aquatic. Hawkins was a great race car driver, but primarily in sports cars. His foray into the Grand Prix scene lasted only one season before he went back to his strong point. Like so many others, Hawkins was killed in a race car, testing in 1969. He raced GT40s and Lola T70s among a host of other cars as well. Hawkins' father was a priest, and ironically, one of the things that endeared fans to the popular driver was his often magnificent use of profanity. Rebellion at its finest. Hawkins had some of his best drives in sports car endurance races with the likes of David Hobbs and Jackie Ickx, splitting the duties among them. This, though, was his wettest day. Like an oxpecker on the back of a hippo, so sits the Go-Go-Mobile on the back of one of 4 Burliette T100 trucks ever built. Constructed in secret and unveiled to a shocked French public in 1957, they were the largest trucks of their day. Designed for work in the oil exploration efforts across the Sahara Desert, the mammoth trucks had 29.6-liter, 700-horsepower Cummins diesel engines, 7-foot-tall tires, an unladen curb weight of 110,000 pounds, and, best of all, a completely separate gas engine that operated the power steering system. The transmission was a semi-automatic Clark 4-speed, and the brakes were another kind of freaky cool thing. Each wheel had 4 huge discs with their own calipers to get this thing stopped. Apparently, a handful of these trucks do still exist today, and just a couple years ago, one got toured around the French countryside. Oh, as mentioned, the car in the back of the truck is a Go-Go-Mobile. Burliette made the French rounds, having been bought by Citroën in 1967 and then Renault in 1978. By 1980, the name had slipped below the waves of history. The name's gone, but the trucks still live, and likely will for a long, long time. Miami, Florida, June 1969. One of the most frightening air disasters of the 1960s has just taken place. A DC-4 plane converted to haul cargo for Dominican Air has taken off from the airport, suffered an engine failure, and in a desperate attempt to get back to the airport, has crashed on one of the city's busiest streets. 11 people lost their lives, including the 4 crewmen on the plane. On the ground, people were hit by things. One man died when he wrecked his truck trying to miss the airplane. Others passed when the buildings they were in got decimated by the flying hulk of the airplane crashing into or skidding over them. The entire area was engulfed in fire as the wing tanks tore open and drained all their fuel onto the scene, igniting it as it spilled. This photo, capturing a Mustang with a radial airplane engine smashed perfectly into its nose, made papers across the country. The Mustang was in a used car lot, and every machine on the lot burned, according to news reports. A stunning image from a day the city has never forgotten. The plane stopped less than 2 blocks from a highway, which would have made the whole scene exponentially worse, if that's even possible. Well, this ain't good. That's the 409 in transmission out of Caleb Barretteau's Flying Frenchman A. Altered lying in the middle of the strip at New England Dragway about 50 years ago. The car got in trouble and hit the guardrail, which was made out of cast iron water pipe. The engine tore itself from the chassis and tumbled down the track, ending up as you see here. Barretteau was not badly hurt in the wreck, amazingly. We're guessing it was a while to get this mess cleaned up between the oil, the smoldering hot engine, the ambulance ride, and the car that was literally yard sailed across the track. They don't build them like they used to. Thankfully. Boom. In 1964, a Texas Rambler dealer named Jay Battenfield staged a violent publicity stunt to counteract some weird automotive propaganda that a Connecticut police commissioner was spreading. Back then, the common belief was that if you got into an accident in a small car, you were as good as gone. Leo J. Mulcahy, a top cop in Connecticut, staged, quote, tests with big cars crashing into small cars, and the results had no analysis other than wreckage. We're guessing that Mulcahy had a buddy that was a Cadillac or a Lincoln dealer. As it turns out, the results went nationwide. This was bad for business if you sold small cars for a living, and so Rambler dealer Battenfield decided on a plan. He had this reinforced big rig drive into the biggest stuff on the road at full tilt, mocking the Connecticut tests. This photo went national, and Mulcahy was exposed as a fraud. This moment of impact between the rig and the Cadillac sums it up. Ka-boom. October 15th, 1958, Babylon, New York. An Air Force C-123 ran out of fuel and crash-landed on the Southern State Parkway. The plane was on its way to Mitchell Field on Long Island when it ran precariously low on fuel. The crew was diverted to Zahns Airport and came up a half-mile short of the runway. When it hit the highway, the plane went under an overpass, which is where things officially got bad. The 119-foot airplane passed through cement columns just 50 feet wide. The tail was ripped off, one wing was completely sheared off, and the other was massively clipped. 3 cars were involved in the melee, and 1 driver was lost. The driver here was unable to stop their 1953 Pontiac and T-boned the giant aircraft in the middle of the highway. All the crew on the plane survived. The C-123 was a relatively new craft at this point, having debuted in 1956. These planes would serve until 1980 in various roles, including the dubious one of spraying Agent Orange in Vietnam. This is a truly bizarre and wild photo. Driver Jackie Oliver looks away from the decimated remains of his Lotus 49 at the 1968 French Grand Prix. It's nearly inconceivable that he'd be standing there unscathed after looking at the car. According to the history, the rear wing collapsed, leaving Oliver with no control and sending him off course at 125 miles per hour. The race was held at the ancient Rouen circuit, which was fraught with danger at every turn. The place was so bad that Joe Schlescher was killed in a wreck on lap 2 of the race driving for Honda. It would be the last F1 race ever held at the track. Oliver's crash came in practice before the event. His driving career would see him in competition until 1977. While he never won an F1 race, he was considered a strong talent. He also competed in the Can-Am and other series as well. October 22, 1895. A late-running steam locomotive entered the Montparnasse train terminal in Paris somewhere around 40 miles per hour. Whether from negligence or physics, the train couldn't stop as it bore down on the station. It blasted through the thick rear wall of the station, plummeting onto the street below. The incredible part of the story is that the train went through the concourse area where people were walking around after it jumped the track. A woman was lost on the ground by flying debris launched out of the building, and amazingly, that was it for the injuries. A handful of people on the train were hurt mildly. The engineer was fined 50 francs for his crummy driving job. It took 4 days for riggers and engineers to figure out how they were going to clean this mess up. During that time, curious Parisians milled around the locomotive and got their photos taken on the scene. Truly crazy. No, this photo from July 24, 1983 has not been photoshopped, and the story is incredible. That 767 ran out of fuel on a flight between Montreal and Edmonton, Canada. The quick-thinking pilots remembered an old airfield that one of them spent time at while stationed in the Royal Canadian Air Force. As it turns out, one of the pilots was also an experienced glider pilot. They had miscalculated the fuel volume on the plane, thereby leaving themselves short on fuel. As mentioned, the lead pilot was a glider expert and managed to literally glide the 767 to the runway of the Gimli airfield, where it skidded to a stop on its nose. This came much to the surprise of the Canadian Sports Car Club, who were using the facility as a racetrack. The legend of the Gimli Glider happened because the plane was fueled in liters instead of gallons, as this was during the Canadian transition to the metric system. No one died, the plane was fixed and flown until 2008, and the pilots got a couple weeks of unpaid vacation for missing this problem before takeoff. You've likely seen this photo, but do you know the story? That's Doug Coulter upside down and flying in a sprint car on February 29, 1976 at the Imperial Fairgrounds Raceway in Imperial, California. The rather shocked and unfortunately wrong-way-facing photographer is Bill Corbisher. A man named Mike Arthur took this image. Coulter was just beginning his flight after running over the wheel of the car you see sliding into the frame. He tested that square roll bar a time or two and walked away. Amazingly, there has been racing at the Imperial Fairgrounds, often called El Centro Fairgrounds, since 1930, so we're officially over 90 years of competition at that track, originally built for horse racing. This photo was taken during a CRA, or California Racing Association sprint car event. So, now you know. Top Fuel racer Larry Brown is suffering one of the most famous engine failures in drag racing history at the infamous Challenge 72 race held at Tulsa. Don Garlits had organized this event to compete with the NHRA U.S. Nationals, and while the event did draw stars, it didn't hamper the Nationals. Brown actually beat Dennis Baca on this run, but shockingly was unable to return for the next round. Note the flying hunk of crankshaft headed towards the wing. Steve Reyes took this photo. So do you want to know who the real king of speed was in the 1960s? Don Garlits? No. Andretti? Nope. Craig Breedlove? Nope. It was the man who owned and flew or drove the hot-rodded racing Bearcat plane and Top Fuel dragster sponsored by Smirnoff Vodka. His name was Darrell Grenemeyer, and while he was not racing the plane or the digger, he was a test pilot on the SR-71 Blackbird project. His plane was the fastest propeller plane in the world in the late 60s and ran nearly 500 miles per hour with help from those same Lockheed engineers that were designing the SR-71. The dragster was a top-shelf piece that saw Grenemeyer share the seat with the likes of Larry Dixon Sr. and others. He described his first dragster ride, in a fuel dragster, which was the only thing he ever raced, as leaving him, quote, breathless. So for racing the fastest propeller plane on Earth at the time, winning the Reno air races multiple times, running a top fuel dragster, and developing the baddest plane in the history of man, Darrell Grenemeyer was the king of speed in the late 1960s. Now you know. Now this truly is a jaw-dropping image, and this truly is some real pulling power, but not for the reasons you think. The incredible machine you're looking at is called Big Musky, and it's the largest walking dragline ever constructed. Now, you're not seeing all the scrapers pulling the dragline itself because, believe it or not, this giant machine would actually walk on a set of massive feet when it needed to move to a new part of the mine. When working, the machine sat on a tub, which is a massive flat surface that allowed it to rotate to keep from sinking into the earth, spreading its 27 million pound weight over a massive area. Because of the wear and tear in the tub, it needed to be periodically changed out. What you're seeing here is the effort needed to simply do that job. The old one would be dragged out from under the machine, and the new one dragged under it and then affixed to the bottom of the machine. I think it would be pretty crummy to be one of the guys stuck at the back of this massive smoke-belching effort, especially when you consider all these different grading machines and certainly bulldozers that were being used to pull the old tub out. Big Musky used a bucket that could hold 220 yards of earth when it was full, and it was the size of a two-car garage. The machine was 222 feet tall, had a 310-foot boom as well. The total boom down length was 487 feet 6 inches. The machine was electric, relying on a cable that fed at 18 megawatts of power. Total voltage? 13,800. This thing cost $25 million to build in 1969 dollars and took some 200,000 man-hours to finish the job. The machine worked into the 1990s before being dismantled in 1999. Its bucket, and all of its massive glory, is on display in Bristol, Ohio. If you get a chance, stop by and check it out. It's indescribably huge. Many of you probably think this photo is fake, but I promise it is very, very real. And now we head to the U.S. Nationals in Indianapolis in 1969. Racer Dick Oldfield has just attempted to launch the Iron Butterfly, a 1964 Dodge 330 with a Hemi engine. Employing the popular but dangerous neutral start practice that either got results or destruction, Oldfield got the destruction on this day. Back in the 1960s, automatic-equipped cars didn't have a myriad of torque converter options available like they do today. Stick-shift guys could simply launch their cars harder by revving the engine up and sidestepping the clutch. Oldfield was one of the first to devise a method where he would rev his car to 4,000 to 5,000 RPM in neutral and then smash the car into drive to rocket off the starting line. By doing this with the higher revving engine, it would launch the car far harder than simply coming off of the foot brake. The only problem was that the 727 TorqueFlite transmissions hated this, and they did explode like this a bunch of times. Transmission parts would fail internally, allowing the transmission drum to overspeed drastically and then cause the whole works to come apart like it was stuffed full of dynamite. The NHRA outlawed neutral starts at their events to minimize the risks. Oldfield was okay. A legendary racer, he's still a hero in the Chrysler community. This, however, was not his finest hour. Lastly, we go to October 30th, 1908. Carl Fisher and George Bumbaugh have affixed a massive balloon to a brand new Stoddard-Dayton automobile in a publicity stunt that they hope would see them flying the car in front of many thousands of people. And it actually worked. Fisher was the daring entrepreneur who founded the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, helped develop the city of Miami, and did a million other things, told newspapers that he would fly the car, land it, and drive right on home. Some 5,000 people showed up to the Indianapolis Gas Company plant that day, and boy did they receive a show. Carl and Bumbaugh sat in the seats of the car for photos and then commenced throwing off ballast. At 4:30, the supposed, and I'll get to this part, 3,200-pound car floated up and drifted off. Now see, the car had been actually stripped of all the extra stuff it didn't need and some stuff it did need, like, an engine. The car traveled to an altitude of about 100 feet, where a 6-mile-per-hour wind blew them gently along. Experienced balloonists, both Fisher and Bumbaugh, were up to the job. The car landed pillow soft in front of a few hundred people at about 6:15 p.m., which was a pretty long flight. An identical car driven to the scene and stashed by Fisher's brother was used as the getaway machine. No one knows how the press of the day fell for this ruse, but it totally worked. The stunt received national attention in papers across the country. While it did not save the Stoddard-Dayton brand from bankruptcy, it launched Carl Fisher's star even higher into the stratosphere. He'd opened the Indianapolis Motor Speedway less than a year after flying this car. So there's a myriad of photos from the internet. Some you've seen, maybe some you haven't, but now you know the stories behind all of them. So when they pop up and someone says nothing, you can now say something. I'm Brian Lones. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more interesting, weird, fun, automotive, gearhead, and mechanical history.